I was not expecting that answer, but that was a very, very good, insightful answer.
One of my total ownership areas is the 3D printer in the office.
My total ownership area is the canteen.
So one of my total ownership areas is...
So I'm at another total ownership area, and this is Denise's. We put this in place for a reason. So if the manager is completely bogged down with all of the sand and the gravel in your business, they're never going to be thinking about how to move the business forward. When you go to an area and you see that Alison has total ownership of this area and this is where to restock from and this is how to do this process, it just allows for better flow, and it's again ties to another concept. Wherever you ask the question, that's where the answer should be. So if you had total ownership of this, what type of things should you be looking for to make sure that this is always working and at a really, really good standard? And it might seem very menial. When you take that same thinking through all of those same areas, you get your physical environment looking the way we look today.
Hey there! I started this channel with one goal: to help people grow people. But here's the thing, growth isn't a solo journey.
The best leaders, teams, and businesses thrive because they learn and grow together.
And that's what we're building here. So if that sounds like something worth being a part of, hit subscribe, because the more of us there are, the more we can invest in learning together. Let's grow together.
Welcome everyone to Chapter 11 in the Lean Made Simple Learning Club, focusing this week on total ownership. Firstly, I want to welcome Alison for joining us all the way from Ireland and from the home of Lean Made Simple. I've really got to thank Alison first up though, because last year I emailed Seeding Matters to try and start my lean journey. And Alison was the one that jumped in, emailed me back and introduced me to Peter and Matt, and also to Edwin as well. So thank you, Alison, for putting me in the right direction, because it's now I'm part of this great group that we've got going in Australia and New Zealand now, which is awesome. Alison, over to you.
Hi everyone. So thank you very much for having me today, and thank you, Sean, for hosting. We've had a few chats prior to today, and you've been an incredible person to be able to help present today's learning. And I'm delighted to have been able to connect you to a group of lean enthusiasts. I know more than anyone how important it is to have a strong network of like-minded thinkers. I think we all like to think that we are on a continuous improvement journey, but I think that whenever you come across small communities like this here, like what you guys have, you find out that they're actually not just continuous improvement thinkers. They're actually really strong lean maniacs, just like us. And then it's almost like we found our people. So I love to see communities like that get together and then join with the rest of the world. I'll tell you a little bit about me. I started my career in manufacturing when I left school at 16 years old. I did an apprenticeship in manufacturing, in woodworking specifically. And I worked for one company for 15 years. So while I was with that company, I spent about 5 years in manufacturing. So that was as a cabinet maker, and then moved my way into design. This is a kitchen manufacturing company. Moved my way into design for about the next 5 years. And then for about the next 5 years after that, I moved into operations management. So managing the operations of that company, a small family run company, before moving to Seeding Matters about 8 years ago. Back then, we had just started our lean journey. We were about a year into our lean journey, so very, very early stages, and still trying to win over the culture with continuous improvement thinking. And really, we were all trying to understand what waste is. And I very much remember back then when I first started, I was a few months in going, I just can't seem to find any more improvements. I feel like I've just improved everything. What else is there? So it took a few months for me to go through the understanding what lean is, because I had never heard of lean prior to starting Seating Matters. It was actually lean that drew me here. My sister worked at the company for a few years before I started, and she had told me all about this new initiative. And I thought, this is something I want to be a part of. Lean's been around for years, but I just had never heard of it. So during my time at Seating Matters, I worked at order processor. I moved into inventory management. I moved into production management, and I'm now operations manager at Seating Matters. Throughout the roles that I've had, I've made huge change in every role. I didn't just go and do the role. I stepped into every role and I left it better than I found it, and completely transformed every role. So during my time in order processing, for instance, we implemented an internal ERP system that connected with our main accounting ERP system. And to this day, it's been one of the biggest transformations within our company and how we operate. I moved then into inventory management and worked with Ryan and Decky at that time to implement Kanban and our purchase ordering system. Spent a few years doing that. It took probably about 3 years for Kanban to get fully implemented into our company and for every single person to fully understand Kanban, to work correctly. And lots of mistakes made during that time. And then I moved into production management, spent a few years in production management before moving into operations management. While I was in production management, I worked with Ryan and Decky and JB at that time, and we were all really leading production. I just had the title, but we implemented one-piece flow, we implemented tack time, and we pretty much systemized everything that we could systemize. Every problem that we came across, the first thing that came to our mind was, okay, how do we systemize this? And I'm still very much a systems thinker. I have been for a long time. I absolutely love the concept of total ownership. And it's one of my favorite concepts, and one that made an absolute transformational change to our physical environment here at Seating Matters. We actually have a small video to play just showing a little bit of total ownership at Seating Matters.
Hello, CUSEC and Lean ANZ community, and welcome to Factory 7 here at Seating Matters. So today I'm going to talk about total ownership and the origins of total ownership and how it came about and why we have it. We had brought total ownership to our company about 2 years into our lean journey. Prior to total ownership, we had lots of areas in the factory that weren't up to a good standard. What we had noticed at that time was that there were, if I was a sewer, for instance, Madeline or Jenny or Beverly, my sewing machine was coming up to a really, really good standard. My work desk was coming up to a really good standard. Paddy in the wood area, his workstations were coming up to a really good standard. As in, we had good 3S. We were 3Sing every day. We were making really good process improvements. But what we noticed was that there was still about 80% of the physical factory and offices that weren't being looked after. And we noticed that these were more communal areas and communal machines or machinery or equipment that were being used by multiple people. So Ryan had come up with the idea of total ownership because he remembered the quote that dual ownership is no ownership. And he had spoke to the rest of the leadership team about that, and we were all very much in agreement at that time. So what we had done back then was we had decided to identify all of the areas that were being used by multiple people and assign total ownership to one person that uses that equipment or area. So it would be an area close to our terraces over here, for instance. And I actually see a total ownership sign, behind his head. So he's actually working at his total ownership area. Although multiple people use that machine, he is the one who has total ownership of this machine. He actually works in this area, so he has total ownership of the forklift as well. So we have 6 forklift drivers at Seating Matters, and out of the 6 forklift drivers, 1 has total ownership. And what that means for our tourist who has total ownership of it is that he will come here maybe every week. I'm not sure what his 3S schedule says, but his 3S schedule will tell him when to come here and look after his total ownership area on a regular basis. He has created his total ownership schedule as well. So he decides every Monday or Thursday or maybe twice a week that he'll come here and decide what he needs to do here. So as you can see, this is a 2018 forklift. So this forklift is now 7 years old, but if you look at it, it's at a really, really high standard. So yes, there has been scuffs and marks along the back, like you would see nearly every forklift that I've ever seen anyway. But Arturus cleans it. He has orange paint in stock. He has grey paint in stock, and he looked after it to a really good standard. And because he does that, the other 5 forklift drivers look after it as well. His name is on this forklift and they treat that as if it's his. They don't lift the tools out of it. They don't leave paperwork on it, and they don't damage it. If there is a wee scuff or score, they don't damage it without telling Arturus. They work with Arturus and they help him tidy it up again and leave it to a really good standard. So total ownership allows respect between colleagues. At the baler, and I've just noticed that Keelan has total ownership of the baler, and this is a really good example of what total ownership is, because everyone has rubbish in the factory, so we all use the baler, but Keelan has total ownership, and you can see here that there are tools that are needed to use the baler, to empty the baler, to make sure that it can function right so that we can keep putting a rubbish in. So all of the tools are colour-coded and labelled. Even a brush is colour-coded and labelled. And if you come around here, you'll see that he also has standard work on how to empty the cardboard baler. So this is a Gemba doc. So you'll see that Keelan will have been the one to have created that. And if you want to follow me this way, I'll go and show you some more total ownership areas.
Hi, it's Billy up in design here. One of my total ownership areas is the 3D printer in the office. We have 4 people that use this, so it's my responsibility to make sure that this is clean, tidy, working. All the materials are filled, Kanbans are pulled. We have all the tools that's here in their place, and just to make sure that it's always working for everybody.
Hi, so my total ownership area is the canteen, and although I don't clean it every day, I am responsible for looking after all the appliances in it and making sure everything's in its place. So if something was wrong with the microwaves or the toasters or the coffee machine, I can get the correct engineers in to look after it.
So one of my total ownership areas is this visual board that we use in the accounts office. So we break up our tasks daily, weekly, monthly, and everyone is in charge of their own tasks, but I have total ownership for the entire board to make sure all the standard works are kept up to date and all the cards are turned over the right way each day.
So I'm at another total ownership area, and this is Denise's, and this is our inventory rack. So every inventory rack and area that we have in our entire facility has someone that has total ownership of it. Now, we do have an inventory manager, and they do all of the processing of the Kanbans, and they also do an inventory audit every week as well. But the total ownership person is someone that can come to the area so this is a 3S schedule here. They will come to their total ownership area on a Wednesday and a Thursday and check the area. So what they're doing here is they are 3Sing the rack to make sure that it's clean, it's tidy, and looking for any abnormalities. They are making sure that all of the labels are in place and that the standard work is in place, and really just checking over it to make sure that maybe someone has or hasn't pulled a Kanban. We're just checking that no one has made that mistake, because it's very easy to make the mistake. Total ownership has been an absolute game changer for our business. We have people visit from all over the world asking us, how does your factory look like this? How does it get to this standard? Total ownership is the reason why our factory gets to this standard. And I would really encourage every single business to apply this concept.
Very well done, Alison. Very well. Thank you very much for that. And pass on our thanks to the staff that joined in on that too and helped make it. That was awesome. So a couple of the questions that I had: at what point did total ownership kick in at Seating Matters? Because it wasn't something always. You've just mentioned that you realised there was areas that weren't being taken care of in the lean journey for Seating Matters. When did it really kick in?
It was about 2 years into our lean journey. I can't remember exactly if it was 1.5 or 2.5 years, but about that. And I remember Ryan had come in one day and had come up with this idea, this concept that he has done quite often throughout the years. And some are good and some are not so good, but he brings it to the leadership team, and we know whether it's one that it's definitely we're going to roll with. And this was a concept that we knew could absolutely help us, because the leadership team, we were all managers. And we knew that when we felt like we had total ownership of everything at that point, as in every corner of the entire department that I was managing was my responsibility. And I felt like I needed to look after everything. When Ryan explained the concept of total ownership after reading the book Extreme Ownership, and remembering a conversation that he had with a business mentor way back years ago, that dual ownership is no ownership, he decided that we should share responsibility of the entire business with everybody in the business. And this was something that I felt absolutely we could get on board with, because I remember firefighting the entire time. Way back when I first started, we were sprinting at lean, and we were trying to introduce concepts here, there, and everywhere. And it was difficult to manage. There was definitely a lot of running around and firefighting in those very early stages. And when we introduced total ownership, it gave everyone a sense of autonomy and allowed people somewhere outside of their own areas to improve. I definitely felt burden removed from my shoulders anyway, and shared out.
So what's for you yourself personally then? What is your total ownership, given it's an office-based role, although an operations manager? How do you implement total ownership on your own behalf?
So I am one of very few people that has total ownership of something that's not physical. So my total ownership is our internal ERP system. We call it Entire, and that is the ERP system. And it's still to this date my total ownership. I'm not a software developer, so I'm not the person to fix any of the issues that happens, but I am the in-between communicator to resolve those issues. There's another person in the company, Kira. She has total ownership of another digital system, and that's our maintenance system. That's MaintainX, that we use for maintaining all of our machinery, equipment areas. She also has total ownership of that.
And have you seen it transition then into your personal life?
Absolutely. I think that total ownership is one of those concepts that you can't not take into your personal life. And I learned a long time ago that there's no one coming to save you. We all have problems, no matter who we are. Every single one of us have problems and issues and challenges that we're facing all the time. A lot of people, including myself, sometimes we think that the solution is with somebody else coming to help us. I very much am a hyper independent person. So my first port of call is always, this is me and this is my responsibility, and I'm the one to fix this. Maybe too much so where I sometimes don't call out for help whenever it's right there in front of me. But yeah, absolutely. I am where I am today because of the decisions that I have made in my life, as we all are. And I very much understand that. So yeah, it has completely transformed my life just by the mindset. Having that mindset.
Yeah, and I think lots of us do that without even thinking about the principle that it's total ownership. It's just, hey, this is with me. So have you ever had anyone in the company reject or refuse to take a total ownership area? Or do people normally just put their hand up and say, oh, I'd like to look after that?
A little bit. So no one has said, no, I am not taking that area. That's not something I want or don't want. But I do remember over the years, a few people have come to me and said, I'm not sure that this total ownership area is right for me. And that may be because they have just moved departments. We do a cross training here where you could be in one department for a year and then move to another department. And they've just said, it just doesn't make sense for me to have total ownership of this area anymore. We can change total ownership areas. Quite often we assign the right total ownership to the right people. So a total ownership is usually given to someone that is close to that area and that we know can actually take good responsibility of that area.
All right. Well, at this point, I might hand over to James.
So, Alison, I'm really excited for today's chat because today I've just spent a good part of the day, in our processing plant. And in that processing plant, we've got about 300 people. There's multiple stories to that plant. And I was talking to the area superintendent today about implementing total ownership because the work area standards aren't that great. So my question's about, I go through and I assign total ownership to individual team members for certain areas of this plant. What's that transition look like? Like, how do I, as a leader, ensure that, I assign Sean an area? How do I ensure that Sean is taking ownership of it? What is that sustaining routine or that leadership routine that you have to ensure that people are maintaining ownership of their area?
Yes, so you'll have seen in the video there that we have a system to make sure that total ownership is looked after. So during our 3S time, we have 15 minutes of 3S every day. We have a structure around that. So every person in the factory, they have a 3S schedule from Monday to Friday, and they decide what they do on each day, and their total ownership area is included in that. And it might be once a week, it might be twice a week, it might be once every 2 weeks. Some people have a 3S schedule that rolls every 2 weeks. And that allows for total ownership to be given time. It's like that age-old thinking that whenever you introduce lean to your company, lots of people say, well, when am I going to get time to look after this? And we did find that because we had to introduce improvement time. We said, okay, let's use improvement time to look after total ownership. Now, total ownership can be looked after at any point during the day, because if the coffee machine breaks down, who do we contact? We contact the person who has total ownership. If the baler's not working, we contact the person who has total ownership. If the software's not working, they contact me. And that can happen at any point throughout the day. But perhaps the 3Sing of that particular area happens during 3S time. So we added it to a system. So quite often, anytime we have a problem, we try to systemize it. And we had a problem where we had 80% of the factory not being looked after. We created total ownership. We then realized total ownership wasn't being looked after. Okay, let's systemize it. We don't go to the people and start pointing fingers and saying, you didn't look after this, and they're saying, well, I have no time. So we systemized it and said, okay, let's look at how we can systemize that. And also we don't do formal Gemba walks here because we're all quite close to the factory, and I'm on the factory floor lots and lots. So I have to make my way through the factory quite often throughout the day. All of the other managers do, and we're all using total ownership areas. So if we see something that is maybe substandard, we're very candid and open with each other that we can say that this needs to be looked after. There needs to be a little bit more attention going towards that area.
I thought that would be the answer, Alison, so thank you for confirming that. My other question for you is, you mentioned like the leadership, like you felt like you were owning everything there,
Yes.
and then you implemented the total ownership. What was that transition period like? Like, how did you do that transition? Because I can just imagine, you have all this weight on your shoulders and then one day you don't. Like, what was that transition like?
Again, it was a lengthy process. It didn't just happen overnight where I had burden and then the next day I didn't. I seen that there was something there, and I'm very much an integrator. So whenever I see something that's a really good idea and I know can benefit the company, I'm all in. And this was one of those concepts that I was all in on. So I worked with the leadership team and the rest of the team to make sure that this is here and this is here to stay. When we first implemented it, we had started at the very front door of the physical factory and decided to walk around with a clipboard and okay, who works near here and what needs to be looked after? Okay, so Bella is in the accounts office. Okay, can you look after the front entrance? Okay, well, who's going to look after the next part? Who's going to turn on the TV in the morning? I'm just visually taking myself through the factory at that time. And so we started off maybe with about one person had one total ownership thing each. Where now multiple people have multiple total ownership areas. It's still only one person per area, but I can have total ownership of 3 areas. Not too many. We try not to give anyone too many. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely it does. It answers it perfectly. Thank you. Over to Edwin now, I think it is, Sean.
So my question is, how do you decide to structure total ownership of areas versus equipment to ensure clear accountability while still fostering teamwork and shared responsibility?
Yeah, so there are certain people that should have total ownership of certain areas and equipment, and that will usually be, so for instance, if it's a machinery, then it should be someone that knows how to use that machine or machinery. And the same with any area. There is no point in assigning ownership to someone at the complete opposite end of the physical factory to where today. And it's also doesn't make sense to assign total ownership to a forklift of someone who is not a forklift driver. We assigned it based on who the operator was and who could use that, who uses that area most. So physical areas are easier to assign because it's just someone who works nearby. And they can 3S that area. When it comes to machinery, we will pick an operator when there's lots of things around the facility that nearly everybody uses. So for instance, we have 2 balers, everybody uses them, but we just assign someone who was nearby to make sure that they fully look after everything to do with that. We have about 23 hoovers in the factory. Madeline has total ownership of all of the hoovers in the factory. And so it doesn't matter where they are, she looks after all of them. And to be honest, that was one of my biggest reliefs was Madeline looking after the hoovers, because prior to assigning total ownership of the hoovers, I used to get asked questions like, we need a filter for this and we need a hose for this one, and the battery doesn't work on the Dyson over here. And I was going, I know this needs done, but at that time, I was trying to get production out the door. I was working on stop the line improvements, and the Hoover just didn't take priority for me. But it's still really, really, really important to the business that all of the Hoovers are working for whenever we need the Hoovers, because we need to make the best use of cleaning and 3S time so that we can get back to serving the customer and adding value to the customer. So it's still really important that all of those non-value added tasks, like making sure the kitchen is working so that we can have our breakfast efficiently, making sure we can clean up the factory and all of the Hoovers are working. So it was really important for that to be looked after. And I was delighted whenever we were able to share total ownership of some of those smaller things in the factory, and it allowed me to work on implementing tack time and implementing Kanban and one piece flow and the things that were actually going to change how we manage our production.
And so, in your video, it was clear that there weren't these red stickers everywhere with total ownership, yet you have everything covered, it seems like. How do you find that balance between plastering these labels everywhere and not?
So everywhere that has total ownership has a total ownership label to it, apart from digital. I do believe that we shouldn't over document our business and have labels everywhere, because they all just become invisible over time. But I'm very much a strong advocate for visual control. We have a full label station set up, and we are still making labels 9 years after starting our lean journey. We're still making labels every single day because it allows for good flow. When you go to an area and you see that Alison has total ownership of this area and this is where to restock from and this is how to do this process, it just allows for better flow, and it's again ties to another concept. Wherever you ask the question, that's where the answer should be. So yeah, there is a balance, and I don't think that we have over documented it or labeled too many areas. There's lots of labels here, but not too many. I think we're not going to get rid of our label station just yet.
All right, that's my questions for you. Thank you, Alison.
For total ownership of communal areas such as the office foyers or walkways in the factory, do you initially assign someone to create the standard, then put the area on rotation like a toilet or a lunchroom? Or is it more a case of, is their area like a work cell or machine that needs to be just continuously developed?
So both people can have total ownership of communal area and also have total ownership of a cell that's used by multiple people, but not one person there all the time, every day. So if I'm Beverly in the sewing room, for instance, I could have total ownership of a machine that is used by all of the sewers and a few of the cutters, but I could also have total ownership of the kitchen area that they use in the sewing room. That doesn't mean that she would have to clean that area every day. So the canteen, for instance, it is on a cleaning duty rota along with the bathrooms. And that means that even though I'm just thinking, so Denitza has total ownership of the kitchen we've seen in the video there, but she doesn't clean the kitchen every day. And there's someone else that cleans the kitchen. But if, for instance, we need a new toaster or we need a microwave or one of the chairs are broke in the canteen or the I'm not sure. The bins need replaced, and then we'll go and see Denitza, and she will make sure that those are added. But she doesn't do the cleaning every day unless it comes around to her name, and she does that. So we have both. We have the rota, and we have total ownership of that area, and that's the same in the bathrooms as well to make sure that everything's working correctly. Denitza is very good at looking after the canteen, as in if someone has forgotten their duty that day, she'll just remind them that you're on kitchen duty today.
Yeah, Phil, would you like to jump in? Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's all cool. Hey, thanks, Alison. Every time I see videos and the content that GD Matters put out and what you've done today, I'm always inspired, taking it to the next level. And so you've pretty much answered a lot of my questions. And so really about the implementation of starting out. So you talked about when you very first started, the team walked through from the front of the building, through the reception area and that side of things. Was that the management team, or did you walk through that area with the people that were part of that and say, hey, here we are, who's going to look after this? How did that sort of start to happen?
Yeah, so that was just a walkthrough of the management team. So maybe one or two of us, not a whole group of 5 or 6 of us walking through the entire facility, but just 1 or 2 of us in that area, and discussing with the people as we were assigning total ownership. Would you mind taking total ownership of this area? Prior to assigning total ownership areas and creating the list, we had brought it to one of our morning meetings to say that this is what we were going to do. And I remember that we had brought a Hoover, a Henry Hoover, to our morning meeting area and set it right in the middle of, and everyone stood around the Hoover. And Ryan done a very good learning on what total ownership of that Hoover means. And that means, okay, so he took everything apart. He made sure that every single component of that Hoover was labeled and color coded. He had asked everyone else around the room, if you had total ownership of this, what type of things should you be looking for to make sure that this is always working and at a really, really good standard? And lots of people give loads of ideas as to, okay, we should have a weekly maintenance review of this. We should have a total ownership label on it. All of the components should have good visual control on them. We also asked everyone, what does that mean for everyone else in the facility that uses the Hoover, for instance? And we had all come to the conclusion that, okay, it means respect. Everything that you have total ownership of, treat it like it is your own. That you own this, as in Madeline could take that Hoover and bring it home and bring it back in the next day. It belongs to her. And that was the reason for signing the total ownership labels. Was the signature on it meant that Madeline had physically signed that total ownership label and allowed us to give respect to her and her Hoover. And it might seem very menial, but when you take that same thinking through, we have about 180 total ownership areas in the factory today. When you take that same thinking through all of those same areas, you get your physical environment looking the way we look today.
When you started the total ownership, you obviously had a good handle on 3S in the company. What would you say to a company that started with lean and perhaps they're not fully on board with the 3S side of things, would you get 3S down really well before you start assigning total ownership? Or would you use perhaps a total ownership as a way perhaps to get buy-in to improve the 3S?
Yeah. So in my opinion, we have no call to be looking at any other concept outside of 3S unless you fully understand 3S. So unless your business is fully bought in to 3S, don't look at any other lean concept. Morning meeting in 3S is where it all starts. And we're still 3S and massively every single day. 9-10 years later, we're doing it every single day. And it's a huge concept that if you don't understand it, don't even look at total ownership. To implement total ownership and to implement anything in your company, your culture needs to be in a position where it's ready to accept change. Today, we can implement any concept whatsoever. We can walk out into your morning meeting area and introduce something that we think may be the biggest thing, and we'll have lots of heads nodding because we've created a culture now of, okay, we respect you and we're going to go for this, and this is something that we know that you wouldn't have brought to our morning meeting if you didn't think it was going to work. So we didn't get introduced to total ownership until about 2 years into our lean journey. And we have lots of people visit us on tours, and some managers and owners of companies say, well, if I brought this back to my company today and said, okay, I now want you to do your job and I want you to look after this machine over here, the first response that they would get would be, well, what are you going to give me for that? When am I going to get the time? Are you going to pay me more? Am I going to do this? So you need to be careful that your culture is in the right place before embedding it.
So, hey, fantastic. That's awesome. Thanks, Alison.
So Harry's question is, we have 3 main machines, which we plan to give the guys total ownership of soon. Just to get total ownership started, is it effective to rotate total ownership of machines among workers every few months, or does this defeat the purpose of total ownership? Our reason for wanting to rotate the ownership is that we thought that the owner would be the person doing the weekly maintenance of their machines, but maybe they should just be responsible that the maintenance gets done, not actually the person that does the maintenance. Does that make sense, Alison?
Yes.
Okay.
So I think that total ownership should stay with one person and only be rotated if that person has moved to another area, or they decide that they don't want to do it anymore, or you think that they're not doing a good job looking after that area and somebody else would be better. And it's okay to do that and to change it if they're not actually doing a good job of looking after it. Get someone else to look after it and give them something that they would be good at looking after instead. I think it should be one person. But if any of you recall Ryan's Total Ownership podcast, it's an incredible podcast. If you haven't listened to it, you should definitely go and listen to it. Ryan mentions on that podcast that when you have total ownership of something, it is your responsibility to make sure that someone else knows how to maintain that area, equipment, machinery when you're not there. He references our QC manager who does QC when our QC manager isn't there. He's responsible for making sure that there is someone there and they know how to do it as well as him. So the same for Paddy in our wood CNC area. He's responsible for making sure someone knows how to look after that when he's not there. And he may introduce a rotation on maintenance, for instance, but that's up to Paddy to make sure that he introduces that rotation, not unless, well, he could work with you as the manager or the owner. If you think that, okay, there is potentially risk here where only one person knows how to manage this area, and if they happen to be off or an unforeseen absence, then who's going to maintain the machine if it breaks down or fix, I'm not sure, fix something in the machine that's not working. So you may work with them and say, can we get another person trained on this maintenance and add it to a rotation? But they're still the person to create the rotation and what needs to be done during that time.
What's left in the chat is, Edwin, you had one more in the chat there.
Yeah, I was just wondering, I think you answered it anyway, is like, are you still finding areas with total ownership?
Yes, sometimes. So every year we do a total ownership audit, and the audit takes place in January every year, and we get a reminder through our maintenance schedule. We actually have that in our maintenance software to say, do your total ownership audit at this time. Total ownership can change throughout the year based on new starts. And when we get a new start, if a new start is replacing someone else, they won't automatically get what that last person has had as total ownership, because they may just not have the skill to be able to look after that. So we'll just assign the right person to that. So it does change throughout the year. And the inventory audit allows us to check whether or not the right people are the right people to look after those areas. And quite often, not quite often, well, years ago, we had lots of solutions to our problems and issues that we had came down to, okay, let's give someone total ownership of that to make sure that the service is always booked, to make sure that the inventory manager doesn't always have to look after every single Kanban in the entire facility. They may do all of the processing of the orders, but who looks after the physical racks in Factory 3, the physical racks in Factory 4, and so on, to make sure that all of the systems that we put in place are being used in the correct way, because we're all human. It's really easy to not follow a process or a system. And total ownership is just another system on top of the systems that we have, just to make sure that we have not made any human error mistakes. So yeah, we do add total ownership areas, not as often as we used to. We probably started with about 30 or 40 total ownership areas, and now we're up to 180. So, and that may increase and it may decrease.
Do you also find, because people come and go, that person that is leaving, because they have this mindset of total ownership, it's like they know it's their baby and they have to pass it on to somebody. They're not just going to leave it and like they go out the door and there's still these labels with their names on it. So that's the kind of mindset. I guess that's the kind of culture that you've created.
That's right. Now, there are times when someone leaves and their name is still on a total ownership label, so we're not absolutely perfect.
It's so disappointing, you know.
That does happen. So we take lots of responsibility, but I have seen that happen before. So I'm not going to pretend that doesn't happen. It does happen, but ideally, when we're doing our audits or checking areas, we can reassign it. So Kira has total ownership of total ownership. So I will speak with Kira, or one of us will speak with Kira and say, okay, I've noticed that Rebecca's name is still on one of the total ownership labels. She might have had 4 total ownership areas. Her name's still on one of them. We'll need to reassign that. So
you have a spreadsheet of all the names and all the equipment and all the areas?
That's right. And it's placed in the factory as well. So we have it printed out and in the factory so everyone can see that. And we'll also post it to our improvement group chat. Oh gosh, maybe every quarter. Just a reminder, this is who has total ownership of what areas, and another subtle reminder to yourself that you're the one that has total ownership of this area. Make sure we're looking after this. All of the concepts that we have put into place, they all start out fantastic, and the momentum around any concept slowly starts to slip back every day. We're always slipping back. All of our standards are always slipping unless we put focus, attention, and awareness towards every concept that we have in place. And once we put attention back onto total ownership, it just gets boosted and revived again. Like every concept that we have in our lean culture, the dial kind of falls back down again, and we just have to keep pushing it back up.
Yeah, it's like weights, like gravity, right?
That's right.
And sorry, I have one more question I'm dying to ask you. Why do you think this concept of total ownership matches so nicely with lean? Because, you know, lean traditionally comes from Toyota, but there's no mention of that in Toyota. Why do you think this concept matches so well with that?
Because we all bring certain elements of value to the business. And we're all hired to do a particular skill within the business. And we all do our skill. And then we have a little bit more to do. So as a manager is hired to take the business, look after day-to-day operations of the business and take the business to the next level. We should be always thinking forward. We should be thinking in strategy all the time. But when you're bogged down with day-to-day non-value added tasks, when I say non-value added tasks, necessary non-value added tasks. So we all know the value, non-value, and the what's necessary and what's not. So a lot of total ownership areas and tasks are necessary non-value added. And why should that be all burdened onto one person, especially one person who should be forward thinking? Because usually all of those things come down to a manager, a supervisor, a leader of the area. And a lean thinker knows that, okay, let's share this out because I've got lots of value to add to this company. I need to be thinking of the next new system, which could be tack time, a new machine, manufacturing step change, as well as a welder. I can't weld, so they're fully focused on welding and a little bit more. So we're all doing our value and a little bit more of necessary non-value added to keep the wheels turning, to make sure that we can all move forward. Change doesn't happen in a business by just quick 2-second improvements all over. It's a combination of quick 2-second improvements and huge big decisions that management make, and both of those take the business forward. So if the manager is completely bogged down with all of the sand and the gravel in your business, they're never going to be thinking about how to move the business forward.
I was not expecting that answer, but that was a very, very good, insightful answer, I must say. Yeah.
That was
Thanks
an
for that,
awesome
Alison.
answer. Very
Yeah,
good.
back to you, Sean.
Okay, well, if anyone else has anything more to add, we've exceeded our hour, so it was fantastic. We just couldn't stop talking and asking questions. So just thank everybody who did attend, and mostly Alison, thank you very much for allowing your time and the time you've given me too in help preparing for this. It's been fantastic, and a big woohoo because you are our first female guest speaker. As Edward mentioned before, and hopefully the first of many. I couldn't have thought of one better, so thank you very much.
Yes.
Hopefully we get more female lean leaders, and there are lots of us out there, so hopefully more can join your learning clubs. Thank you very much for having me, and for everyone that joins these. I know how incredibly important that these are, not just for everybody that's here, but also to Edwin for initiating it to start off with, and then editing all the videos and then putting them out there for everyone else to see that doesn't even know that this exists. To be able to join this, and everyone can benefit from what you have created here. So thank you so much for sharing it.
Well, thank you. It's thinking about the next person.
Another system.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, I think that we spend a lot of our time looking for the next big thing that we could implement from Toyota or from Seating Matters or from FastCap or some of the greatest lean companies. And really, if we just zone in on focusing on what we do have and making sure it works really, really well can take a huge stress off the business and help you move forward and reduce so much waste if everything's working right. So I have a concept, and I say it over and over and over again, that everything should be working. There's nothing that shouldn't work. If there's a clock that's not working, I just point to it and say that should work. If there's a TV not on, why is the TV not on? If there's a screen sitting dormant, I'm definitely one of those that this should work. And if there's no one that has ownership of that, I'll think, okay, I'll systemize that and think, okay, do we need to assign total ownership? Because everything needs to work. We put this in place for a reason. And at that time, then it's, okay, do we still need it or do we not? Yes, we still need it. Okay, it's not working. Who's going to look after this now at this point?
Yeah, well, it only takes one cog to be broken for the bike chain to fall off, doesn't it? So
I always have a saying from Tracy and Ernie Richardson's book, The Toyota Engagement Equation. It's an incredible book, and they talk about every person every day engaged. And for me, it's one of the main principles that I live by in my role here at Seating Matters, is to make sure when I walk through those doors every single day, is every person engaged every day in all of the concepts that we're trying to do, because they're all not going to be fully engaged in everything all the time. And it's my role and leadership's role to make sure that whatever's slipping gets dialed back up again before it slips too much. Total ownership is one of those concepts that could slip too much. So we're constantly looking out for concepts, tools, principles that we've applied that have fallen by the wayside, or else dipping slightly and needs a burst of energy put back into it.
It reminds me actually of a story of Oprah Winfrey, which had a sign above her door that said, "You are responsible for the energy you bring into this room." And it's basically saying like that, you know, you're taking total ownership of your emotional state as well, right? And I think a lot of people struggle nowadays. A lot of people are broken and don't know how to manage that.
One of my installers walked into the office this morning, and his first thing was a big deep sigh. I said, "Come on, mate, you can't start the day like that."